Okay. What I've got in front of me here is a bow, okay? Now it's a recurve style bow, and it's named that because it's got this curve and then it curves up at the end, right? And that's the thing that really gives it some pop. Now I don't use this when I'm sitting in a tree stand hunting deer. A friend gave this to me actually. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. But whether you're shooting a bow like this or whether you're shooting a compound bow with some modern technology, the principles are still kind of the same. And go back to your summer camp days, okay? If you've ever remember a camp counselor teaching you how to do this, when you first pick up a bow like this or any bow, the tendency, if it's brand new, it's kind of an intimidating thing. And what you're going to grab this string really hard, and you're gonna grab the handle really hard. You're going to kind of white knuckle it, you can kind of see the whites in the knuckle, And any bow instructor will tell you, if you grip this stuff really hard, that's what makes the shots inaccurate. What they'll tell you to do is imagine kind of a wall pushing ahead of you flat and then a pulling behind you. So really your grip in a lot of these things is supposed to be pretty relaxed. And actually even your fingers, it's supposed to be kind of on the pads of your fingers, and you push kind of firmly ahead flat and you pull back flat, and that's the thing that really helps the arrow to fly true, right? The more you white knuckle something, what they'll say, right? The more that you white knuckle something, the more inaccurate it's going to be. Grip it tightly, and you'll watch that arrow fly off course. Pull it back firmly, flatly, push forward in a relaxed way, and that arrow will fly true. But now I'm going to say this, okay? That instinct to grip things tightly, especially when it's kind of new or scary or intimidating or whatever it is, that instinct, it's pretty understandable, isn't it? We have a tendency to white knuckle things, I think. Anything that makes us feel that way. Why? Why is that a really natural human reaction? Well, I think it gives us some kind of feeling of control, doesn't it? Like I'm in control of this situation. When it feels like I'm going to pull this arrow, this arrow is going to fly. Hopefully it flies away from me. This string's going to snap right in front. Whatever it is, if I can grab onto it pretty tightly, I can make sure this goes how it ought to go. Now, here's the obvious problem, right? The obvious problem with that mentality is what? Well, turns out, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news here, but there's a lot in our lives that are just 100% completely out of our control, right? Right? I mean, that's kind of the problem with the white knuckling approach. There's things that it does not matter how much you white knuckle it. It is not going to make it any more in your or my control. So grabbing onto a bungee cord as you're jumping off the platform for the first time. Hate to tell you, 200, 300, 500 feet down, your grip on that bungee cord is not going to matter near as much as that harness. But nevertheless, this is really, really what we want to do. So here's the simple question. Here's the simple question I've got for you right now. Here's the question. What's one thing that I might be white knuckling in my life right now? Okay, think about that just for a second. Okay, what's one thing that you're kind of maybe white knuckling? Maybe you're worried about it. Feels like it's out of your control. You can't really predict how it's going to go. You're kind of afraid how it might work out or not work out. Those are the things that kind of make you tight in your chest, or a little sick to your stomach, or keep you up at night. Your mind kind of spins around and around on it. And your instinct in those is just to spend a lot of your mental, emotional, even financial energy at times getting a really firm, maybe too firm of a grip on it. What's one thing that you're white knuckling, okay? There's this great story in John 11 of two women who, despite going through a situation where it would be very understandable if they white-knuckled it, despite that kind of situation, they did exactly the opposite, these women did. It's the story of a man named Lazarus, but really, it's a story of these two women. So Lazarus gets sick and he dies, and he's dead 4 days before news reaches Jesus. And we're talking about Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And they were friends of Jesus, okay? And so they're sisters and brothers or siblings. And it's a story about all of them, but really it's a story about Martha. So here's how the story goes, okay? Jesus gets news that his friend Lazarus is sick, all right? Jesus has been healing people, so there's this obvious expectation that once Jesus hears that his dear friend Lazarus is sick, what's he going to do? Well, he's going to go. He's going to take care of that, right? And he'll come at once, and he'll do his thing, and Lazarus is going to be right as rain. But as the story goes on, Jesus doesn't do that. He doesn't come right away. And Lazarus dies. In fact, by the time Jesus does come, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Mary and Martha have been grieving their brother for 4 days. So here's the story as John tells it, John 11, verses 21 and 22. Jesus arrives in the scene, and Martha says this, "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will do whatever you ask." That's an incredible statement. That's an incredible statement. Martha's saying, hey, if you would have been here, I know he wouldn't have died, but I also know that even now, 4 days after he's been dead, Jesus, God's going to do whatever you ask him to do. This woman knew that Jesus had the power to do whatever for whoever. She knew that he didn't do that for Lazarus. She knew that he let him die. She'd been mourning for 4 days, and yet her words to Jesus weren't, "How dare you?" Her words to Jesus weren't, "Why didn't you?" They were, "You could have. You didn't. But even now, I believe you can." You know, I asked you a question earlier, and I want to ask you another one. What's one thing that you need to ask God for in the new year, even now? Even now. I mean, think about this once again, okay? Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, even now. You could have stopped it, but you didn't, even now. It feels out of control. It feels like I probably should white knuckle it, even now. Believing that Jesus can, okay? Believing that Jesus can. What's one thing that even now you might need to ask him for as 2022 comes on us? Hey, there's one more part of the story that we probably should be connected to as we think about this. This is what Jesus said when he first heard the news about Lazarus' sickness. Here's what he says in John 11. This is verse 4. When Jesus heard about Lazarus, he said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that his Son may be glorified through it." And then at the end of the story, okay, when Jesus makes good on what he said there, here's what Jesus says in verses 40 through 44. After it's all said, and right at the climax of the story, Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you'll see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone from the tomb. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you've heard me, and I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he heard this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Listen, it might feel pretty risky. To ask God for something that you're holding pretty tightly to. It's pretty risky to kind of loosen your grip on that a little bit and say, "Hey, even now, God, I think you can. I believe you can." Pretty risky. But I want to encourage you, even now, if you can relax your grip a little bit, Think about this. If God moves, if he does, what benefit would those around you really be able to kind of see and take away when they watch you pray a prayer and walk through a situation like that, where beyond all hope, maybe, you pray one of those kinds of prayers and even now God moves? What might they see? If it's at all like Lazarus' story, here's what we know. They're going to see just how good and glorious and powerful and present and near our God really is.